Welcome back. I'm Pastor Ben, and this is the second lesson in our series entitled Little Sins That Are a Big Deal. And in this lesson, we deal with the problem of ingratitude. You know, when it comes to being grateful or thankful, we often look at our children, and maybe you can remember being told this as a child. Maybe you find yourself saying this as an adult. But we often remind children to say thank you and to be grateful for what they have. I can remember one year for Christmas, we had some family members who came over, and these are family members that normally would get us all, decently nice presents for Christmas. We were always excited, and they came over one year, and they actually came over Christmas morning for breakfast. And so they came over, and we started opening presents, and one at a time, the presents we got were, well, let's just say not up to the normal caliber. I think I got a winter hat. I think one of my siblings got a journal. These were intentionally kind of lowball prizes. Because what they hadn't told us and what we didn't know is that there was one gift at the end for all of us, and that was a Nintendo Wii, which was pretty new at the time and was really exciting for us. Well, as we go through and are opening these presents one at a time, our family members joked later about how incredibly appreciative we were. Oh, wow, thank you for this hat. I didn't have I've actually been needing a winter hat, so I'll be sure to use this one. Or, wow, thank you for the journal. And they told us later that they were laughing because they looked at the presents and thought, these are terrible gifts. What are these kids thinking? And I would say that really was a testament to our parents who taught us and trained us that when you get a gift or a present, no matter whether you like it or not, you always say thank you and you always be appreciative of it. And that's, I don't think, incredibly uncommon. I think we teach little kids it's important to be thankful. But it's not just little kids that need to be thankful. It's adults as well. And sometimes we can be reminding our children to say thank you, or reminding kids to say thank you, or think that somehow we learned to say thank you as a child, but now we forget that somehow. And we can begin slowly, if we're not careful, to become ungrateful. In this lesson, we look at the sin of ingratitude. And again, maybe this is a sin you don't really think of, right? We might think of sins like, maybe swearing, or even last week on pride, or I believe our next lesson is going to be on worldliness. And you might look at sins like these and think, oh yeah, those are kind of bad. Ingratitude, or really a lack of thankfulness, might be one of the sins that's near the bottom of the list, or may not even come to mind. But the reality is that there are few things that can be as poisonous to your soul as the great sin of ingratitude. And this is made particularly challenging by the fact that we live in a culture that pushes ingratitude. In fact, there's a question about that, and I think that would probably be, again, if you're doing this in an interactive format, a really good question to take some time with the group and think through. How do we live in a culture that pushes ingratitude? I think maybe 5-10 years ago, a lot of us would have said, that the advertisements, and that's certainly still true. I mean, we're just bombarded with ads, people putting things in front of us, trying to teach us, hey, this is, you need more, or if you had this product, then you would be happy, or this can really, really help you. I think today there's an increasing awareness even of social media, and the fact that I get on there and I look at all of these carefully curated photos of my friends' lives, and if I'm not careful, I can begin to think, how come I can't have that, or why don't I have that? And that can feed this ingratitude as well. Again, I think there's probably more there, and I think that's a question that would really be worth mining, again, especially if you're doing this in an interactive format. But what are some of the ways that our culture has pushed the thinking that, I don't have enough, I need more to be happy? And so what we're going to do in this lesson is, again, as I mentioned in our previous video, if you were able to see that, is that we're going to be going through, and we're going to be, with most of these sins, starting off with the definitional question, right? Let's define it. What is it? We're then going to move to what are the dangers that are associated with it? And then finally, we're going to look at what does Scripture have to say? How do we beat this? How do we address this particular sin in our lives? And so we're going to take that track here and begin by asking the question, what is ingratitude? And what we're going to argue is that ingratitude really has two sides to it. First, there's a lack of thankfulness for what I have. Okay, I look at my house or my car or my wife or my home or my job or my family or fill in the blank, and I decide I don't like that. I wish I had. I'm not appreciative of it. And then the other side of that is that I look at what somebody else has, or something that is on sale, or something that I don't have, and I wish that I had that. And again, this can be material things. This can be immaterial things, relationships, status, that sort of thing. The question is, do I look at what God has given me in my life today, and am I thankful for it? Or do I look at it and think, it's not enough. I actually wish I had that thing over there. And so we're going to go ahead and look at these. The first section here, look up the following passages and summarize their teaching. I think that this can be helpful. Again, if you're doing this in a small group, have everybody look up these passages and kind of discuss them as a group. And then I do kind of a summary of what we get. And James 1, Matthew 7, Psalm 119, all of these verses that you'll be looking at, they all address the goodness of God. That God is a God who gives us good things. That's the teaching of Holy Scripture. God is a benevolent God. That means He does benevolence or He does goodness to us. And we ought to take that seriously. And yet, often we look at what God has given us and we decide, well, I don't like that, or I don't want that, or I wish I had this. I'm not content with what I have. A sad example of this is the people of Israel in Numbers 21. They're not thankful for the food that God provided for them. Numbers 21:5, our soul loatheth this light bread. We hate this manna. And, to think about how that would strike God, how He would think about that here He is providing supernaturally miraculously for these people, and they're looking at Him and they're like, we don't even want that stuff. There's other examples in Scripture, and there's, I'm sure, many that you could pull from of people who were not thankful for what God had given them. I think of Satan, obviously, who fell from heaven because he wasn't pleased with the estate that he was in. Again, as we talked last time, Satan and even Adam and Eve, when they took the forbidden fruit, they weren't, here's a garden filled with trees bearing delicious fruit, and there's one tree that they're told you can't eat from that, and that's the one they desire. You could think of David looking at, once again, at Bathsheba, and despite all that God had done to bless him, he decided that he wasn't going to be happy unless he could have her. And so over and over again in Scripture, we see this where people are not thankful for what they have, and they find themselves longing for and desiring and wanting to have more. So what are some of the things that God has given us that we tend to overlook and ignore? And again, this is where we start getting practical. And this is a time where in your own study or while teaching this, it's good to stop and to think. And it can be helpful just to make a list even of all the things that God has given to us, all the things that God has done for us. But it's not just a lack of thankfulness. Ingratitude is also often closely associated with a demand that we have more. Proverbs 27 verse 20 reminds us that hell and destruction are never full, so the eyes of man are never satisfied. There is an intense desire to want more and more the things of the world. As C.S. Lewis put it, I like this definition, he describes it as ever-increasing desires for ever-diminishing pleasures. In other words, we want more and more, but the more we get, the less satisfied we find. And this is important to understand because it means that at its core, our ingratitude is not about our circumstances. And that's what we would like to think. We would like to think, well, God, if you had given me this or if you'd allowed that in my life, then I would be happy, I would be content, I would be thankful. But that's not true. And the reason you know this isn't true is because there are millionaires who are unthankful and there are fast food workers who are content. And I think this is one of the most helpful things to realize when we realize that my ingratitude, my lack of contentment, isn't ultimately about what I have or what I don't have. It is ultimately about me. It's an issue of my own character. I'm not thankful. And having more stuff isn't going to change me. It's not going to make me into a thankful person. If I look around and I'm not thankful, God could pour more stuff into my lap, but that's not going to change the heart of the problem because the heart of the problem is my heart. And so we move on and we ask the next question, okay, so why does this matter? What happens if I am an unthankful person? Well, the first problem is that ingratitude leads to greater sin. In fact, Romans chapter 1 deals with this. This was a passage we talked about in the last lesson because it addressed the issue of pride. But it's interesting, if you read Romans 1 carefully, it's not just pride. It's pride and ingratitude, unthankfulness, wedded together, wrapped around hearts that pulls people down into sin. Romans chapter 1 is discussing the fact that God has created the world, that everybody can look at the world and they can see him and they know that he exists. And yet, verse 21 says, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God. And then notice these next words, these are key. Neither were thankful, but they became vain, empty, or uplifted, or arrogant, foolish, we might say. They became vain in their imaginations, in their thinking, their calculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they actually became fools. Here we have ingratitude and pride, because here's what happens. Pride says, I deserve more than I have. And then ingratitude comes along and says, and I'm not going to be happy until I get it. Ingratitude says, I wish I had more than this stuff. And pride says, yeah, and I deserve it. If we're proud, we're going to overestimate ourselves, and we're going to look at the way people are treating us, or we're going to look at what we have or our success. We're going to decide it's not enough. Humility and gratitude are going to go together. And so if I'm proud and I'm ungrateful, what's going to happen is I'm going to find myself spiraling and going into greater and greater and greater sin. Because what's going to happen is I'm going to start holding it against God. And I'm going to say, well, God, if you're not going to give me this or that or the other thing, then I guess I'll just have to go out and take it. Now, of course, we would never use such language, but the reality is that's what begins to happen in our heart, that I look and I say, I'm not pleased with what I have. I wish I had more. I ought to get it. And if we resent God, I mean, honestly, if we are bitter against God and we feel like God is not coming through for us, if we don't believe it when Scripture says that he's good and he gives good gifts, we're not going to want to follow him. We're not going to take his laws seriously. We're going to start fudging on the edges, and before long, we're going to find ourselves involved in all kinds of sin, compromise, because we're frustrated, we're angry, we're bitter. So ingratitude is a problem, first of all, because it's going to lead us to greater sin. Secondly, ingratitude actually attacks the character of God, and the reason it does so is because ingratitude says, God, you're not enough, and what you've given me is not enough. Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 5, and this is a good one, I think, to just ask a question and let people sit with. Hebrews 13:5, it says, let your conversation, again, that word conversation has the idea of your lifestyle, the way that you live. Let your lifestyle be without covetousness. And the covetousness here is particularly related to our desire for things, for money, and the things money can buy. But I think we can apply that more broadly. Let your lifestyle be without covetousness, and be content with such things as you have. For he hath said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. Okay, so that raises the question, why does contentment matter to God? Because God said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Now ask yourself, what does that promise have to do with covetousness? Why should I not be covetousness? Because God has said he'll never leave me or forsake me. Because when I'm covetous, what I'm essentially saying, when I'm living for stuff and for things, what I'm essentially saying is, God is not enough. God's presence is not enough. It's not enough to have God with me. I need other things too. God's provision is not enough. What he's given to me, yeah, that's great, but I need more than just this. And so Hebrews 13:5 teaches us that we need to be willing to look to God, and to look to God alone for our contentment. And what happens when we aren't thankful? Well, I give an illustration here, and I think probably hits home, especially if you have mom or dad cooking food, right? And all the kids sit down to eat, and maybe it's one of everybody's favorite food, or at least it's supposed to be, and the kids sit down, and mom's cooked it, and the first kid takes a big bite and says, yuck, this doesn't taste good. Now, in a lot of homes, ours included, you're not allowed to say yuck. Why? Well, again, it goes back to we're trying to teach proper manners, proper decorum, but also we realize how insulting that is to the person who made it. Now, if my wife is making dinner for the kids and the kids sit down and say, I don't like this, I mean, that kind of hurts a little bit. If the husband were to chime in and say, yeah, sweetheart, this really isn't your best work, I mean, the mother would be crushed. She would be discouraged. She would feel underappreciated, and probably in that instance, rightly so. Imagine now how God feels when he provides for us out of his goodness and his kindness, and we look at it and say, yuck, that's not good enough. I need more. And so ingratitude matters, first of all, because it leads to greater sin, but secondly, it matters because it attacks the very character of God. It says your presence is not enough, and it says your provision is not enough. So what do we do about it? Maybe you look at your life and you say, I do struggle with ingratitude. I wish things were different. I wish things had turned out different. I wish I was in a different place, or I wish I had more. Man, it'd be really nice to not be so nervous at the end of the month that, we're going to make it through with all the finances in place that we need. Maybe you find yourself in at one place or another, you struggle to be thankful. How do we address our ingratitude? Well, there's a couple of things, commands in Scripture that I think if we will implement these in our lives, it will address the problem in our hearts. The first is simply to recognize God's provision. We want to recognize God's provision. James 1:16 and 17, I think, is helpful along these lines. Again, these are powerful verses as well. These are some of my favorite in all of Scripture. But it says this, it says, do not err, my beloved brethren. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. I think it's interesting that it puts together this idea of do not err, my beloved brethren, right with this idea of God giving good gifts. Now there's question by those who study the book of James, is verse 16, which says do not err, is that connected to verse 15, which talks about sin always bringing death, or is it connected with verse 17, which talks about God as the giver of good gifts? And I think the fact that we're even asking this question and the way it's lodged between those two, I almost view it as, personally, I think it's kind of transitional. And I cop out and say, maybe a little bit of both. But think about it. Those are the two lies, so to speak, that you have to accept, or the two truths that you have to reject in order to sin. So the first truth that you have to reject, that Eve rejected, is that sin doesn't lead to death. It's interesting, in verse 15, there's this chain, and it says sin brings forth death. Now remember, in the garden, that was the thing that the serpent explicitly denied. Nope, you won't pay for this sin. You will not surely die. God said, you will surely die. The serpent said, you will not surely die. Word for word quote, just with the word not thrown in there. And then what does it say in verse 17? Every good and every perfect gift is from above. Do you really believe that? That everything that is good comes from God. And that everything that God gives is good. There's a lot of people who get messed up on one or both of those, and it leads to sin in their lives. And so if we're going to overcome the sin of ingratitude, what we need to do is we need to recognize God's provision. We need to recognize the fact that God has given us everything that we have and everything that we need. Again, this verse teaches two things, and I kind of put it there quickly in a sentence, but I want to unpack it a little bit because I think if we get this, it's really powerful. It says every good gift and every perfect gift is from above. Okay, that means only God gives good gifts. Every gift that's good is coming down from above. It's coming from God. You don't get good gifts from anywhere else. You can't find them in the creation. Satan doesn't have anything that he can give you. Every good and every perfect gift is from above and cometh down from the Father of lights. Which he goes on to say, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. Nor it's as if he is so resolute, he is so unchanging, his shadow doesn't even shift. And that means that God can only give good gifts, right? God's not going to give me good gifts today and then bad gifts tomorrow. God's not going to bring good things into my life today and then maybe in a couple of weeks just ruin it. Every good gift comes from God, and God only gives good gifts. And I think if we can come to passages like James 1, study them, memorize them, meditate them, and put them in our hearts, it's going to change the way we view God. And as it changes the way we view God, it's going to create a gratitude in our heart. And as it creates that gratitude in our heart, I think we're going to start to see progress and holiness in our personal lives. And then this understanding about God needs to then be buttressed with the act of thanksgiving. Verbally rejoicing and giving thanks to God for the good things that He's done. We tell our children, I know I keep coming back to this, but we tell our children, say thank you. Why? Partly because it's polite, but partly because the more they say thank you, the more thankful they're going to be. Sometimes it's almost a fake it till you make it, right? When we go through and we say thank you, it's almost as if that act of saying thank you helps create a true sense of gratitude in our hearts. And so thank God. Go through and just start thanking Him. If you're struggling, I would say, with gratitude, and you look at what's been brought into your life and you're frustrated by it, I would say, go look around your house. Start pointing out random things and thanking God for them. Start going through the people in your life and start thanking God for them. Think about everything that God has brought you through or delivered you from. Remember back to times when you were really nervous or afraid or scared and you prayed and God brought you through that and rescued you. Thank Him, thank Him, thank Him, thank Him. And as you thank Him, it will produce gratitude in your hearts. 1 Thessalonians 5:18 says, in everything we should give thanks. Philippians 4, 1 Thessalonians 5, James 1, all of these passages tell us to rejoice. Even if we don't feel happy, even if maybe in the moment we don't feel the most thankful, going through the process of humbling ourselves before God and thanking Him will do a world of good for our spirits. And there's some discussion questions there. And I think it's a good question to ask here at the end. How do we build that regular rhythm of thanking God into our life? And that might be a place where you could solicit practical advice. Maybe you've found something. Probably most Christians pray before they eat. And let me just encourage you, take time and think seriously about what you're saying. Don't just say we thank you for this food and for this day. Pray that you bless it to our bodies and the hands that made it, right? And I'm not saying, if you pray over every meal, you're going to be praying 21 times a week. And, that's going to be probably, I think, if I'm doing the math right in my head, over 1,000 times a year. Okay, so I, I get that you're going to be repeating words a lot. But do your best to think through what you're saying and for it to truly be a testimony of thankfulness and gratitude to God for what He's provided for you. And then think through if there's other ways that you can include things in your life, and just get to the point where something good happens and you thank God, and something challenging happens and you remember to discipline your soul to thank God. It's a simple principle, really, to say thank you. And it seems very small. Doesn't seem like it would make that big a difference. But gratitude versus ingratitude can change your life. Thankful people see what God is doing and believe in what God will do. Unthankful people focus on what they don't have or on what they wish they had. And where you put your focus is going to determine where you end up walking, and the direction you end up walking, and where you end up walking is going to end up determining where your final destination is. Don't underestimate the little sin of ingratitude, because it can be a big deal in your life. Well, thank you for joining us. I hope that this has been a help to you as you prepare or study this lesson. And I look forward to seeing you next time as we go through Lesson 3, Worldliness. And until then, thank you for joining us, and keep fighting the little sins that really are a big deal.